We'll call this meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is the agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Against.
Okay. Max, could you pull the board, please?
Yes. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
He's muted. Mr. Watson is muted.
Yes. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Very
That
well.
was a yes. Yeah. Little delay, man. I got it hardwired, but I feel like mine is always delayed.
Yeah. So the next item on the agenda is the adoption of minutes. Are there any objections? Vice Chair Mendez, did you have something?
Well, just we're behind again. Both Hansel and I have been somewhat busy this month, so
You think?
he got his October minutes ready I guess yesterday. I haven't done the November ones yet. We'll have them both at the next meeting, and you can vote on them then.
So the next item on the agenda is public comment. Is it Remy Trail?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Trail, could you poll the audience for public comment?
Absolutely. If you'd like to speak to the board at this time, please click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, press *9. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. And please state your name and residence when you begin. Okay, Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised at this time.
Very well. The next item on the agenda is the status of the complaints. Mr. Aguilar, are you able to take care of that for us?
Yes, good evening. Since our last meeting, the PCRB has received 2 complaints. There are no complaints for review requests and no closure letters. Just 1 second. Making sure I have the right list. 1 second. Okay, in the 2 initial complaints that were received by the Internal Affairs, they were sent directly to Internal Affairs. One of them was a woman who witnessed a Black male that appeared to be under the influence and unresponsive. And she, along with another bystander, contacted 911 to have somebody assist the gentleman. When the CPD officer arrived, he made an initial assessment. It didn't appear that the individual needed further assistance, but the woman, the complainant, indicated that she asked the officer if they could contact the ambulance. The officer then asked the gentleman again if he needed some assistance, and then he started to walk away when the gentleman indicated he didn't. The complainant informed the officer that appeared that gentleman could consent to needing assistance or not. There appeared to be an exchange between the complainant and the CPD officer. And the complainant expressed that she was concerned about the officer's tone, his lack of sincerity, and that he was willing to allow the person to walk away without providing further assistance. The complainant also indicated that the officer appeared to be reluctant to provide his full name. He provided his last name first, and then when she kept asking, he eventually provided a full name. In the other complaint that was received, their complainant is a Black woman who's complaining about ongoing harassment by a particular CPD officer. She says the officer is harassing her by following her around in different places and attempting to start conversations with her, despite her attempts to ignore the officer. She also indicated that in one instance, the officer handcuffed her after she refused to provide a ID card.
Very well. Does that cover all of them?
Yes, those are the two that were received between today's meeting and the last meeting.
Okay. Very well. Thank you.
I may have missed it. Did we get any closure letters?
No, we have not received any additional closure letters.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the status of the revised ordinance and operating procedures. Vice Chair Mendez.
Okay. Can I share my screen? I've sent a couple of slides in.
You should be able to, yeah.
Okay. Can you see me now?
Mhm.
All right, you got it?
Yes.
Got it.
Okay. All right, as I'm sure most of you know, the City Council discussed the draft ordinance at their meeting Monday. Councilor Snook did an excellent job of presenting the high points, the features of the draft ordinance. What now hopefully is very, very close to the final ordinance to the council. The overall response from the councilors was supportive and positive, and I took that as a very good sign. Councilor Payne expressed delight that the ordinance that we have now includes an investigative component. Heather Hill was also very complimentary of the work that had been done. Just to refresh your memory, the draft that they discussed describes the hybrid model that we've been working for, essentially with almost all of the features. We are assured to receive all complaints. We have the ability to independently investigate complaints and incidents, make disciplinary recommendations. The executive director has fairly substantial power to monitor and review internal affairs investigation. We can hold hearings, request subpoenas, and make policy recommendations. New features that we have discussed less often include a provision that lets complainants ask specifically for the board to investigate rather than for the police to do so. It also allows the complainants to say they don't want the board to investigate as a measure of if they want to preserve their privacy and they don't want to have an amateur counsel up in their business. The ordinance also specifies the structure and membership of the board, meetings, public engagement activities, and training, and not too much different from what you've seen before. So the meeting on the 6th was they did not actually vote on the ordinance because some of the council members had questions about it. Also because the legal review by the city attorney wasn't done. It has since then been completed, and our own independent counsel has had a minimal amount of time to look at it. I'm not sure whether she won't have a lot to say about it. But the intent is that there's going to be a vote at the last council meeting of the year, December 20th, to hopefully approve the ordinance. And to illustrate, sort of the fast track that we're on, this really has to be done by tomorrow. So I've spoken to Lisa Robertson, and she's ready, bright and early in the morning to put it into final format and post it, ready for a vote. After the ordinance passes, which it hopefully will, then we move on to procedures. I think there was an aspiration that the procedures would be completed at the same time, or very, very close to the same time as the ordinance. That didn't quite work out that way. So we will need to draft 2 different sets of procedures, as it turns out. One is standard operating procedures that address how information is to be shared between the board and the Charlottesville Police Department, and to describe the mode of cooperation on complaint processing. At the recommendation of the city attorney, these will be city standard operating procedures that will be approved by the city manager. She has made a suggestion that as soon as the ordinance passes, she will get in touch with Hansel and the interim chief, and she's offered then in cooperation with them to sit down and produce a draft, because she thinks that document there'll be a lot of legalisms in it, and she wants to move forward quickly and then share it with us so we can approve and comment, or disapprove, comment on it, and get it done as quickly as possible. The other element that we need to do, and we need to do this ourselves, is our own operating procedures, which address things like, how are we going to hold hearings? How are the board initiated investigations going to go? What is our code of ethics going to look like? And, basically a number of other issues. So the work is not over, but hopefully, a positive vote on December 20th will give everybody some new energy. So there are some issues that I'm just listing these here, and I'm not sure that any of these are showstoppers, but these are things that were not very clearly specified in the document as it stands. And so if we want to have any input to dealing with these issues, we need to do it in the next 8 hours. So the first, and I think most important, is who has standing to file a complaint. The current draft of the ordinance makes places no limits on who that can be. And I don't think that is necessarily a problem if we have a good complaint handling system whereby we will take all of the relevant information. And on the other hand, there has been some concern on the council, and I think I have some concern as to whether just anybody walking down the street can file a complaint on an incident that they had nothing to do with and didn't see. But my own feeling about that is that we can have an open complaint process to begin with and see how it goes. The second issue is there's a new feature in the ordinance that allows the complainants to ask that the board investigate their complaints rather than the police. In the earlier drafts that I had favored, the idea was that the complainant could specify that we not investigate And then if they didn't specify, we could pick and choose which complaints we wanted to investigate, the most important ones, the most publicly visible ones, the ones that are most likely to set a precedent and to change behavior. Again, this is something that has advantages and disadvantages. If the complainants are allowed to allow us to require us to investigate, that means the board is clearly available to everyone. Process becomes open. On the other hand, if we get too many complaints, that could be a substantial resource drain. We have a limited budget. We only have one executive director. And so we might have to consider, I think at some point in the future, thinking about a screening process that would allow us to gracefully decline if certain complaints. The current document also states categorically that the board can't compel statements from the police. And a commenter, a public commenter, has pointed out that Garrity, which is the cited federal case, does not forbid the police to compel statements as long as they're not going to be used in a prosecution, criminal prosecution. And you have perhaps seen the response from Hansel to this point, and I'll paraphrase, and Hansel, you join in if you want to. Basically, the current situation is that the police standing orders allows them to compel a statement from officers as long as it's not going to be used in a criminal prosecution. So having only the police able to do it, but not the board able to do it, produces a sort of an asymmetry there. On the other hand, if we are investigating a complaint and we want a statement from a police officer, there is a provision in the document that says the police will cooperate to the maximum extent with the operations of the board. So I'm not sure that this provision has a lot of force, or will have a lot of force in practice. And we're getting in I'll go just quickly through these others. Right now there's a quorum requirement of 4 voting members. The current version of the document requires 5. This new version of the document requires 5. I have not been told why there should be a change in that number. I have suggested that we either stick with the 4 as a quorum, or that we allow 4 members of the board to do regular business. Whereas if we're going to be dealing with complaints or investigations or discipline, then we'll need 5. But that's an issue that's outstanding, and it's one that can be changed very quickly. Several of the counselors, particularly Councilor Snook, suggested, pretty much insisted, that that our hearings be presided over by hearing examiners who have law enforcement or criminal justice experience. The current language in the ordinance says no matter what issue we're dealing with, we have to have a hearing examiner. I have suggested to Councilor Snook and others that perhaps we could start out with a requirement and then move to make things optional in cases that are not such high severity or high visibility. I had this next point about being required to file financial disclosure forms there. It's no longer relevant because I've spoken with Lisa, and there's not any. That will not be required. She had just cited a whole bunch of Virginia statutes, and I wanted to make sure that wasn't part of the requirements. She did say, however, that if the council makes us do it, they specify for some specific reason why we do it, they could. But her feeling was that that's just not going to happen. So, and finally, a small but perhaps important point is the current version of this document specifies that all board members will have to go on police ride-alongs annually. And some of the council members, the mayor, I believe, pointed out that riding in police vehicles, could be a triggering or traumatic event for some of the board members, and certainly for some of the candidates. And so I've suggested to Lloyd and Michael that the board be allowed to define a range of training requirements that will allow the board members to become familiar with police procedures, even if it does not involve ride-alongs. So I will answer any questions, and I think I didn't see that Michael Payne was here. They've been very busy, but to the extent that we have any feelings about these issues, this is our very last shot. So we should probably.
I think the Councilor Payne is here, and I think the
okay. Good.
I think the quorum should remain at 4. I think if you extend it to 5, you start to get into more of a challenging territory. 4 has been what's worked, and I think that in order for any business to get done, it should remain there.
Yeah, well, that's my feeling as well. And I think I'm not sure that there's a strong feeling against that, but I think it's one of those changes that just didn't get made because there were other things that needed to be adjusted in each iteration. But I agree.
Sure, Ms. Carpenter. I believe you're on mute.
She's muted.
Sorry about that. I have a little bit of a problem there. But I just wanted to chime in and say I support what Chair Brown and Vice Chair Mendez said about the quorum being 4 and the problems that could, impact the future board, if it's changed to a tiered system or changed to a larger number for the quorum.
Are there any other comments or questions?
I have a question, Mr. Chair, actually from Ms. Hudson. If you had anything to add on that Garrity question.
I don't. I agree wholeheartedly with the commentary that Hansel distributed this afternoon regarding the effect of Garrity, to the extent that the board's procedures or investigations or hearings, processing of information or receipt of testimony is similarly an administrative investigation of officer or employee misconduct, as would be an internal affairs investigation. And the same principles apply with respect to Garrity. If the city chooses for it to be so, that employee testimony may be compelled as long as it is not used in the prosecution of a criminal case against that officer.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and also, Cynthia, I know you have not had a lot of time to read through the whole ordinance. Is there anything else? Any other?
I have not. Lisa and I talked a couple of weeks ago about just kind of where we would insert ourselves into the process, and it's exactly at the point that your slides describe. It's before there's a final vote by council on the 20th. So I know Lisa will be doing a review. She and I have shared some thoughts about some points or some approaches taken in the ordinance that she or I or we together may examine more closely in terms of whether or not they are contemplated by the enabling statute. But for the most part, those are few and far between in terms of material issues. And we'll certainly be fly specking it and wordsmithing it maybe just a little bit, but the larger concepts and the direction that it's taken from what I've had an opportunity to review on a fairly abbreviated basis, looks as if it better incorporates what you understand the council will pass. And that's I would expect that would be a main motivating objective.
Well, and I think also that the council has been convinced to approve a fairly effective model. It's not like we made a huge, it's not like we gave it a lot.
And it's my understanding as well that, at least according to what I've read and what I understand, is that while right now the draft contemplates amending the existing ordinance, that perhaps Lisa will be taking the approach of suggesting to council that the current ordinance actually be repealed and replaced by this one. I'm not sure she's made any final decision on that, so that'll be a part of her drafting process to tomorrow. But that too has, I know she's going to be applying some thought to that. As it pertains to my and Lisa's input, this is an ordinance and therefore an action by the city council. So the city attorney's opinion is the overarching opinion and legal input that would guide the council with respect to legal issues raised. But I appreciate that Lisa has been very willing to bounce off of myself and Cullen issues that that might be a little gray or sticky.
Just if there aren't any more comments, just one other thing that I spoke with Lisa about, and that is that when she proposed to start working on standard operating procedures for information sharing, she suggested that we also work in parallel on an RFP for a investigation or complaint or investigation support software. And that the standard operating procedures will contemplate that there will be some form of some means of sharing information that way.
Very well,
Mr.
thank you
Mendez,
for
there,
that.
are you referencing the software piece?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure that's.
Yeah, I'm sure, I mean, we've been putting these, we've been, Hansel and I have been sort of sporadically contacting, software people who provide this kind of software, and we've been kind of putting them off. And so, hopefully fairly, maybe beginning of the year, we could have an RFP out so they would have something more, more precise and official to deal with.
Ms. Carpenter.
Thank you, Chair Brown. I do have an additional comment in reference to the ride along. I don't support it. I support it being totally flexible to, I think, an individual board member to decide whether they want to participate in a way. I think there's, conversation about other methods or other avenues to make connection other than that, because I do agree with what Mayor Walker said the other night about could discourage someone who would be a very good addition to this board at some point, and would tend for them not to want to apply and try to do some civic service if they feel forced to do something that would make them comfortable. So I hope that in the final ordinance, it's either struck from the ordinance or left totally up to a board member. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree that there should be some compromise there. I don't think, I don't know, previously in thinking about it, it's like I had no thought about any triggering aspect or what have you, until it was actually, brought up tonight. And then it, for me personally, it did kind of, start to make me reflect on my experience in Fairfax County. And, even now it's still a little uncomfortable. So I think that should definitely be some flexibility there for someone who may have had a prior, negative incident.
Maybe we need and maybe address this to Mr. Payne, just an opt-out clause there, so that, it would be required, but you have the option to opt out, and maybe have some alternative training experiences that would be comparable or, not triggering, or maybe a range of training opportunities, any one of which one could opt out of. It's a minor point, but it could become, as Ms. Carpenter says, it could become a pretty big issue depending on who's a prospective board member.
Well, and I would say, just speaking personally, I'm totally open to that.
Thank you.
Mr. Watson.
So on the option for a complainant or someone to desire for us to investigate, I'm assuming we would be working with a investigator or a service or a consultant. And then, which I like that idea, but there's also the reality of we've got to have the budget to be able to hire somebody. If somebody has a complaint and they don't want the city to do or the police to do the investigation. So I'm not saying shoot it down, but that's definitely something that's got to be, because, maybe it only happens once or twice a year, but if it, it's something that, 4 or 5 people do in a row, I don't know how many thousands of dollars that would cost. I've got no clue at this point, but just something to keep in mind. But all at the same time, I wouldn't strike that out. It's just a matter of, as we build out a budget, if we go that route, making sure that we don't have to turn some people away. That's it.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Ms. Carpenter?
I think one last one. Something I read about some of the hearings could potentially be closed to the public. And I was hoping that maybe, I've been reading, our emails back and forth about, the ordinance drafts as they come forward. But could Bill kind of maybe expound on that? Like, what would trigger perhaps this board at some future point going into a closed session for a hearing? Because I don't think that's really been addressed, and it might be of interest to hear something about that.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of a big standing issue. Part of the back and forthing that we've been doing over the last month has been addressing as to whether Virginia FOIA laws allow an oversight organization to obtain confidential information, discuss it in a closed session, and be exempt from FOIA. And the position tentatively of, for example, the Arlington County Board, and tentatively the position, and I hope I'm not doing violence to this, of the city attorney is that currently it would be very difficult to do that, because her interpretation is that it won't work under current law, and that we actually do have to go back and get a change in the statute. So one of the good things that we worked out, sort of a workaround about this. Wait a minute. Let me try it and share again. Okay, you got that?
Yes.
Okay, so the idea here is that this is kind of the new flow chart for complaint processing, where you have someone files a complaint, it goes into a common pot, which presumably is some kind of software system. The complainant chooses whether we're going to investigate or the police are going to investigate. If the police investigate, we get a redacted version of the complaint. They go out and then they do their investigation. They write a closure letter. And if the individual requests a review, or if the board believes for its own reasons that a review is warranted, we go and do a review. On the other hand, if they ask the COB to investigate, the executive director, again, we hire an investigator who produces a preliminary investigative report. This is Lloyd's invention. And then we have a fact-finding hearing. And the fact-finding hearing will be based on the preliminary investigative report, but in general would be public, would be open. And that, to a certain extent, the idea is to circumvent the FOIA issue. If there is a decision made that there was serious misconduct as defined under our statute, under our ordinance, then we have the potential of going in and doing this disciplinary hearing and making a recommendation. If it turns out that there is an insurmountable obstacle for us actually holding a closed hearing, then this little box just goes away. And the only thing we can do is report to the police chief and the city manager that we believe serious misconduct has occurred. So we're continuing to work on ways to deal with this problem. Now, Cynthia, did you have anything you wanted to add here?
No, Lisa and I have simply resolved to engage again around the FOIA questions of the nature that Ms. Carpenter has raised. I see that the approach taken thus far in the draft ordinance that'll be under consideration by City Council is to qualify those provisions about the nature of the meetings, that if state law permits, if FOIA permits, then the oversight board will receive certain confidential information that it can consider confidentially or in a closed meeting. So it leaves open that opportunity to examine the application of FOIA, both with respect to closed meetings and certain records and its application to them on almost a case-by-case basis. And that certainly seems to be a prudent approach right now, but it leaves the matter or the question open.
Organizationally, the FOIA Council, I take it that it is a creature of the state legislature, but it's not binding. That's basically how it works.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
Well, it reports to the state legislature. It's empowered by the state.
Are you
General
talking about the FOIA council?
The FOIA council, yes.
Oh, yes, I was speaking of language in the draft ordinance that, for instance, there's this prerequisite at the
Yeah.
disciplinary recommendation stage that the city attorney determine that and so certify that the Freedom of Information Act permits either a closed session consideration of certain information or receipt of certain confidential information that could be exempt from disclosure. So that's what I was referring to in terms of the approach that seems to be taken in the ordinance draft right now, leaving open on a case-by-case basis this examination as to what FOIA will or won't permit. Whether or not that stays that way pursuant to, Lisa's, future review, I don't know, but we did agree that we thought we could work it out and perhaps clarify it to the point where we didn't have to have that conditional kind of language in the ordinance.
Thank you.
So it is a difficult question. Neither the enabling statute nor FOIA itself, of course, address this issue at all. So localities are kind of boxing in the dark with respect to exactly how it will apply. But you're right, we have talked to the FOIA council. They have a position, but then there are a couple of other positions and we need to reconcile them all.
Thank you.
Are there any additional comments or questions? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the mock hearing and information sharing. Is that Mr. Mendez or Mr. Aguilar? Mr. Aguilar?
I thought Vice Chair Mendez was going to speak on it. I don't have any particular updates on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there have been meetings going on between members of the board and the CPD about how to work out how information sharing might work. And those have been extremely tentative. And they won't obviously get into full gear until, God willing, the ordinance is passed. And again, just to point out, that those have extended to, discussions of information management technologies, and also the issue that this is near and dear to Hansel's heart, which is the idea that we would hold a mock hearing before holding a real hearing, so that we could, work the kinks out of our procedure. And that is also going forward slowly.
Mr. Aguilar?
Yeah, and to that regard, I did just want to add, once you resolve the issue, and I'm not sure if it's resolved yet, about the pending hearing. I think that last meeting, we said that we would check in on today's meeting to see if it was resolved, but we can potentially start scheduling a mock hearing if whatever outstanding concerns have been resolved, but I'm not particularly sure that they have been.
Are you referencing the conversation between the city attorney and the board's attorney?
Specifically, I think that there was a holdup on this particular hearing, whether what information would be allowed to be reviewed. And because of that, it seemed that held the process on scheduling a hearing. But if that has been resolved, then I think we could start working on at least a mock hearing for as early as next meeting, and then you schedule the live hearing after that.
No, I believe that I had stated that it would be impractical for Ms. Hudson and and Ms. Robertson to have that concluded prior to the holiday season and the end of the year. And we were going to look at revisiting it at the start of next year. I believe that Ms. Hudson was in contact with Ms. Robertson to kind of nail down some preliminaries, but there was not a hard and fast that we would have a decision on this particular track until next year due to the holiday spacing and everything else that's going on.
That's my recollection as well. There was also the question of whether or not hearing procedures would be in place and approved on a schedule that permitted the pending hearing to be scheduled anytime before next year, as Chairman Brown mentioned. I understood that to be the hurdle, was the actual finalization and approval of hearing procedures. And the question was whether or not we would go with a set of hearing procedures that operated under the existing ordinance, or whether or not with a new ordinance on the table and proposed to be approved, would simply develop hearing procedures to execute that new ordinance and then schedule this pending hearing using those new procedures. I think we were going with Plan B. Everything would be new.
Oh, yeah, so we're not going to hold a hearing under the current ordinance, I guess is the bottom line.
I mean, I think if we're at this point in the game, I mean, I think that's more reasonable with the expectation of December 20 to have everything aligned under the new ordinance, which is only 11 days away.
Yeah, I mean, we have to convey our apologies to the plaintiffs then, who are still going to be waiting for another couple of months.
Well, I don't think it's the expectation is a couple of months. I think that, again, this, I guess, for the latter part of the year, there are obviously some other things that that are on the table and that the city's working through, and it just was impractical for the city attorney and our council to expedite that. I think, again, I would say, at the very least, I don't know, maybe February or March, but that's not that's not that far off.
And presumably at that point, I think that the plaintiffs would get the benefit of a stronger ordinance.
Correct. Mr. Aguilar?
Yeah, I would just say that even if that particular aspect of the file review isn't resolved, I would encourage at least to begin the mock review process, because you can still get a little bit more familiar with what the deliberation may look like. We can do a limited review where the CPD gives us a mock file where that won't have that disciplinary aspect, but you can still explore the misconduct in there, see what the decision making was like, have somebody just go through the whole process, even if we don't have that resolved. And I think that would get us a little bit closer to having that live hearing once that gets resolved.
So if you want
would you contemplate that a mock hearing would include the proposed hearing examiner model?
We can use that hearing examiner model, and it'll just be you can role play as the hearing examiner or another staff member. I mean, there's going to be role playing, right? So
exactly, everybody be playing roles. That's true.
Right.
I think the thought, at least what I took away from it in the discussion, was that both the board members and members of CPD could get a dry run of how things would necessarily work using a fictional fact pattern or a couple fictional fact patterns, just to get the processes in place, because that's one of the things that members of CPD were concerned about as well, is just how things are going to necessarily work, and the hearing examiner to played a, you know, a minor role to a lesser extent, but the bulk of it was really to get the board and members, or at least high-ranking members of CPD, acclimated to what the process could potentially look like. Vice Chair Mendez.
Yeah, I would just encourage the executive director to continue to pursue this. And you know, if the CPD can pull together a, you know, anonymized file, that would be great.
Do you think NACO would have some materials that are available just for that kind of purpose? I mean, if it would save time, for instance, they might have something canned that you could use. Just a suggestion.
That's a
That's-
great
I mean-
suggestion.
Mr. Watson.
Yeah, do you guys think we should tentatively put a date on the calendar for that mock hearing, just to get, even if that date changes, and I know we haven't spoken with the CPD, but just to kind of get at least a date out there, a target that we can, so we're not in January and still looking at February, March, April. But being as though this happened in, was that June or July of 2020? And there's been a lot, you know, we've done a lot, and the ordinance is changing, but we could run the risk, you know, of a few months going by. So might want to say something like, hey, let's shoot for, I don't know, you know, Wednesday, January, you know, 26, and kind of work with that date, and then, you know, see where we are after we have maybe our first meeting. What do you guys think?
Is that a motion, Mr. Watson?
That's I was just kind of wanting to, maybe it's a motion to discuss. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Okay, yeah, I'll make a motion to propose, and again, we haven't had a discussion with the CPD, but, you know, 26 January, you know, Mr. Aguilar has been down this road, so he knows, he's been telling us we need to work on this. 26 January is a proposed, you know, mock trial date, and if we have to move it, we have to move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Are we at this? We're not. Are we at discussion yet? I don't think we're at discussion. Are we voting first and then discussion? I guess we'll just. Are there any? Sorry, go ahead, Miss Hudson.
No.
So, are there any points of discussion before we actually take a vote? No points of discussion. Mr. Aguilar.
Sorry, just to clarify, will this proposed 26th day, would that replace your monthly meeting, or would this be an additional meeting to your monthly meeting?
I believe that this is, so the monthly meeting is standing the second Thursday, so this would be an additional meeting. Okay.
But I'd like to tweak this one also to Thursday, which will be 2 weeks, you know, after that first meeting of the new year. I said 26, but 27 January. And of course, we know this might change, but again, just having it penciled in.
Okay. And it's at what? And it's at what time again?
Don't want to do the same as a meeting, or
6:30. I think that
Yeah.
would be prudent. Ms. Robinson, can you poll the board?
Yes. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
you're muted.
Sorry, Ms. Robinson. Yes.
that's okay. Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
I
Muted
believe you're
too.
muted.
oh yeah, sorry about that.
Very well, thank you. So that passes and takes care of that. Mr. Trail, we are now at public comment. Could you poll the audience?
If you'd like to speak at this time, please click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, you can press *9. Each speaker will get 3 minutes. Please state your name and residence when you begin. All right, Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Watson.
Just looking back at the, Bill had that PowerPoint up with a couple of issues that were maybe outstanding or things that the city council was kind of working through. And we talked about the quorum, and I agree with, with the group on 4 people, and we talked about the ride along, and I agree with that. We didn't really talk about, nobody said anything about the, who has standing to file a complaint. I remember listening to a little bit of the city council meeting the other day, and my thought on that has been, well, to maybe go along with what Bill was saying, I think hopefully we can stick with anyone as of now can file a complaint, because we do know obviously people who may have had something bad happen to them are not always likely to, come forward, right? And somebody could come to one of us or anyone else, and maybe we or someone else didn't witness the misconduct. But I think that if we keep it open, then it gives us a better shot. I know that there's a potential that somebody could abuse it, but who's that going to be? 1 or 2 people. So I think keeping it open, at least initially, makes a lot more sense to me.
Okay. Very well. Are there any, Ms. Carpenter?
I'm glad that Mr. Watson brought that up, because I do support what he says, that we should try to keep it as broad as possible as far as who can file a complaint. And I appreciate him bringing that up, because I overlooked that myself.
Mr. Aguilar?
Yeah, and just one thing that I think Vice Chair Mendez mentioned too, that it doesn't really specify what the intent is with juveniles or individuals underage. And I think that is something I was alluding to with just investigatory concerns if the board receives a complaint of a minor or of a parent of a minor, and there may be a possibility where a juvenile record may be relevant to the police misconduct complaint. And that's just something to consider, what the intention is behind individuals that are underage, and just in general, but also that was I guess what I was trying to communicate with my question about the juvenile records.
Ms. Hudson, are we precluded by FOIA from accessing the juvenile records? Is that
juvenile criminal incident records? Yes. Now the ordinance makes the proposed ordinance does allow some redaction of records that may incidentally contain information about juveniles, but if it's an actual juvenile criminal complaint regarding their conduct, then what I understand that we contemplated in both the current ordinance and this proposed one is that that would be off limits to the board.
okay?
Bill, you may have more recent information from your conversations or your work with Councilors Snook and Payne, but in my, again, abbreviated review of the draft ordinance, it maintains that approach.
Yeah, basically. I sent it out to Lloyd about the juveniles. It's on the council's lap now. So.
Okay. Are there any additional comments or questions, Mr. Watson?
So if we're going to have this mock hearing, well, my thought was maybe Hansel would try to line up a hearing examiner, but now that I think about it, I think you said maybe Miss Hudson could be the hearing examiner.
Somebody just be, or I'm glad to serve if requested.
But But if not, that's something, a person we'd have to get set up and ready. And maybe it would be better if it was somebody that wasn't sort of already, I don't know, kind of who's been tied to this for so many months.
Well,
'Cause that's
and
what
also,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the ordinance does assign a role to outside counsel in the hearing process, and that's to advise the board. So Cullen or I would probably also need to participate in our contemplated roles in the mock hearing.
Maybe we need to,
Very well.
Mr. Aguilar, maybe we need to look at getting somebody that could be available either in late January or, if it moves over in early February.
No, let's shoot
Keep that in mind.
for that Thursday.
Bill's saying something over there.
Are there any additional comments or questions? Seeing as none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Is there a second? Okay. Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board, please?
Mhm. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
I believe you're on mute, Mr. Watson.
Mine is delayed. Yes.
Very well. Thank you all, and have a good night and happy
Happy
holidays.
holiday, everyone.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy holidays.